Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas Wacker. With me, as always, we have Kyle Cushman. And in today's episode, we are previewing the Belgian Grand Prix. F1 is finally back after their summer break. It feels like it's been a while since the crazy Hungarian Grand Prix that saw Esteban Ocon get his maiden F1 victory. Great story there for him and for Alpine to get that victory here this season. Just an emotional moment for all of them. And then, of course, we go into the summer break on a high, and we come back on a high to one of the most famous racetracks in the world, Spa. Oh, I cannot wait to get going here this weekend. Qualifying coming up in a matter of hours here on the Saturday. We're recording this on the Friday. Yeah, I'm losing track of the dates here, being back out in here, Toronto, but the Belgian Grand Prix back. And then we have lots of races come thick and fast with the Italian Grand Prix just right around the turn as well. So we have some news and notes to get to. Sergio Perez being confirmed for that second Red Bull seat for 2022 and a couple of other things as well. And then we'll just go over our fantasy lineups for this upcoming weekend for the Belgian Grand Prix, as well as make our predictions for who comes out on top for both qualifying and the race. But before we get into all of that, how are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing great because we've got F1 back, and we're going to what is arguably and probably is my favorite circuit on the calendar in Spa-Francorchamps. When you look at the history of the circuit, when you look at just the circuit itself and the high speed and so many historic corners and so many great moments at the circuit, it encapsulates everything about Formula One, from its history to its best moments, everything like that. Eau Rouge up through Radillon and then down the Camo Straight is one of my favorite sequences in all of racing. And so I'm super, super excited for this weekend. Great to have F1 back. And the best thing about the summer break is that when it comes to a close, we come back with one of the most historic Grand Prix races. And what would be, if we kind of had those kind of crown jewel races determined in Formula One, would absolutely be one of those. So really, really looking forward to this weekend.
Yeah, Monaco, Spa. I mean, those are two that really jump out at you.
Monaco, Spa, Monza, and Interlagos, probably the four that first come to mind. There's probably a fifth.
Maybe the British Grand Prix, maybe.
Yeah, Silverstone. So it would be those five that I would have off the top of my head as being like the quote unquote crown jewels. But Spa is absolutely one of those top ones in that top two, top three conversation, if not number one.
Yeah, it's an incredible track. Got a lot of history, and really looking forward to seeing what kind of race we get this weekend. And we have lots of different things to kind of keep our eye on this weekend. Of course, the championship battle is as tight as ever after Mercedes took it right back underneath Red Bull's fingers after the Hungarian Grand Prix disaster that was for Red Bull, with Verstappen scoring basically no points, getting at the back half of the top 10. Hamilton still getting a podium, but Mercedes takes the lead in both the drivers, with Hamilton back from Verstappen, and the Constructors' Championship as well. So lots of different things on the line as the summer break comes to a close and the second half of the season really gets underway. There's a lot of Grand Prix ahead, lots of triple weekends in a row. So there's a lot of different things, a lot of different moving parts for these teams. And who knows how much more development we're going to get in with these cars for the remainder of the season as they focus their efforts towards the 2022 next generation car. So we'll have lots of different things to talk about through the remainder of the season. But in today's episode, let's talk about that second Red Bull seat, because that is not changing hands when it comes to 2022. Sergio Perez has been confirmed to return to Red Bull to partner Max Verstappen in that second Red Bull seat for next season. I'm glad that they decided to do this. It's just been too much juggling around with that seat over the past couple of seasons, from Gasly, or initially it was from Daniel Ricciardo, to Gasly, to Albon, to Perez. Now they finally have found their second driver, at least for next season. We'll see what they do beyond that, if there's somebody in the youth system that takes their attention to maybe take that second seat for 2023 or beyond. But for Sergio Perez, one of the more consistent guys on the grid, has had his struggles, as we've seen with everybody that comes into the second Red Bull seat at times throughout this season, but has won a race, of course, with the Azerbaijan Grand Prix earlier this season. So at least he has that to his name rather than the other two drivers that he took over previously. So lots of different things that go in the argument of way to Sergio Perez's way of saying that, yes, I deserve to be in this ride. Of course, he would love to be a little bit closer in that championship battle, given what Max Verstappen has done so far this season. But nonetheless, Sergio Perez is definitely a very good 1B option for Red Bull here for the next season. And I think it's a smart decision for them to get off on the right foot for 2022 in a next generation of car with a guy that has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and can bring a lot to the team in definitely a new era for the sport instead of putting in somebody a bit younger that may be less experienced. But your thoughts, Kyle, on Sergio Perez returning to Red Bull next season?
It's the logical move. I think that's the easiest way to put it. There was no reason for Red Bull to once again go and try and make a change with that second seat. What they need in that second seat is consistency. They need somebody that's good enough and shown the good enough performances like Perez has this season, how he's won a race, as that baseline, and then have them become more and more familiar with their program. And then into next year, a brand new car, which everybody will be adjusting to. So for Perez here in Red Bull, if it had gone poorly this first season, then yeah, you can make the argument to make a change. But given his experience, given his performances this year, given his previous performances with Racing Point and Force India and everything like that, there was no reason for them to make a change. Clearly, he's bought in to the team format as well, given some of the radio comments that we've heard and some great moments. Okay, let's get them, stuff like that. Big fan of what they have going on there. It seems to be a great relationship between Perez and Verstappen as well. So no reason to make a change there. If they were making a change, the only scenario that I saw going into next season, because I couldn't have seen Alex Albon getting that seat again. I didn't see Yuki Tsunoda getting that seat after one season. I didn't see Pierre Gasly going back up, just given some of the pride element at Red Bull. Honestly, the only scenario that I saw, and it was like a 2% chance or maybe even less, was a scenario where Mercedes didn't give George Russell that seat and Red Bull goes and tries to poach George Russell. That's basically the only scenario that I could have seen where you can go, okay, if you can pull that off, then yeah, it would be maybe a real or maybe a better move to go and make that. But with that, obviously not a scenario that's all that likely, with it seeming like George Russell and all the signs pointing towards him getting that Mercedes seat, just made too much sense to keep Perez in that second seat. And I'm glad they are, because seems to be going well at this moment, and you can only expect things to go better into next season.
Yeah, and they're definitely taking a different approach on announcing that or at least the timing of that second seat this time around, instead of waiting.
If you got it done, there's no reason to let it continue to simmer, right? There's no other realistic people for that seat, and there's no reason to let them go. So go ahead, get it done early, get all those newspaper headlines, get all the talk and rumors away for now, so you can focus on your championship battle.
Yeah, the longer it goes, the more speculation that comes. So at least they got that done. We were hoping that we would maybe have some news on the Mercedes second seat after the summer break, but that has not come to fruition.
Did we get any driver news over the last couple of weeks?
I don't think so. It was a pretty quiet summer, so F1 just taking a little bit more of a step back this time around. But of course, cheekily, they put George Russell and Valtteri Bottas together for the Spa press conferences. And of course, that's the main topic of discussion, the Mercedes seat. And it definitely is deserving of that. And hopefully we do get an announcement on that sometime soon, so that we can bring that to you guys and give our thoughts on the eventual decision for whatever Mercedes decides to do for next season. But happy for Sergio Perez, delighted that he's going to be sticking around in a premier car probably for next season. Going to be interesting to see where they all shuffle out at the end of at the beginning of next season, in terms of how fast their car is, how competitive could they be on race pace, qualifying pace, all those different factors. But Sergio Perez is a really good option for Red Bull, and they didn't really have any other options. Like you said as well, they're a little bit too proud of a team to go backwards and take a Pierre Gasly up, even though he's done really, really well in his second stint with AlphaTauri. Yuki Tsunoda was never going to be an option for that second seat right now, at least. And then there's a lot of different things that I've got a lot of different moving parts around the rest of the grid. Red Bull seems to be finding their position here with their driver lineup. I'm curious to see what they do with the AlphaTauri stuff for next season. That's not been officially confirmed, but it seems likely that they're going to stick with what they have right now with Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. Who knows? There's a lot of different things that could happen with Pierre Gasly, maybe wanting to try a new venture or something like that. But
I think it mainly hinges on what happens in Formula 2 and if Lawson or Yuri Vips are able to secure that championship. Because if they do, then they can't return to Formula 2, and that opens up a whole nother can of worms. But as it stands right now, it looks like things are going to stand pat in the Red Bull AlphaTauri house.
Yeah. And I think that honestly would be a smart decision for the across both parties, that they stick together. Pierre Gasly is definitely capable of more beyond that AlphaTauri seat, could be definitely in a Red Bull seat that would be less catered to someone like Verstappen if it was more of an equal playing field for both drivers. There was no favoritism or something like that. Then Gasly, I think, yes, would have succeeded at Red Bull, and there would have been a long-term future there for him. But his future is elsewhere, and we'll see where that maybe ends up being after next season if he doesn't stay with AlphaTauri, or if he does stay with AlphaTauri this season and into next season. But wanted to touch on, obviously, Sergio Perez. That's a big one. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on that as well?
Nope.
Okay, perfect. And then next, Fernando Alonso is going to be sticking around in Formula One, and that's basically what we were expecting. Was a 2-year contract when he signed it.
I don't know. That was a strange announcement. Like, I didn't really get why they needed to announce that, because I thought we already knew that. But yeah, that was a strange one.
2-year contract. Obviously, when Fernando Alonso signed last season, first year of his contract being this season. Next year, the second year, we'll see what Fernando Alonso's future in the sport looks like after that. But at least we know that he's going to be back with Alpine next season. There's no sort of way that he can wiggle out of the contract if he wanted to. Seems pretty happy at that team, has had some good runs as of late going into the summer break as well. So that team's starting to find their footing. And I'm really hoping that team takes the next step, maybe next season, with that midfield battle and tries to get more consistent podiums, because Fernando Alonso near the front of the field would be absolutely spectacular in 2022. But anything on Fernando Alonso sticking around at least for one more season in Formula One?
Yeah, for starters, we already knew it was going to happen, because there was no way that Alonso and Alpine weren't going to continue that relationship into its second year of that contract. But Alonso has impressed me this year, to be honest. I really thought that he would struggle coming back to grips with Formula One, not having been in the sport for a couple of years. Of course, staying active, doing other things. But Formula One is Formula One. And we saw how difficult it was at the beginning of last year for Esteban Ocon coming back after just 1 year off and being much younger. So very, very impressed by his performances this year. It's been much more of a battle between Ocon and Alonso than I expected to a certain extent. Thought it would be close, but I thought Ocon would have the edge. And so far it's been kind of back and forth. But Alonso has kind of proved his worth and shown that he is a valuable member of the Alpine team, is worthy of that seat right now, and continuing to develop that team where they hope to be as a works team up at the front of the grid. They're the one works team that hasn't really been up at the front of the grid. And so when you look at the move, yeah, it makes sense in that regard. I also look at their academy program and the fact that they've graduated nobody from that academy program to Formula One so far. Part of that comes from not having a junior team as well, or any relationships like that. But that being said, you look at Guan Yu Zhou right now and the amount of money and advertising he can bring, in addition to being a strong driver. No real place for him to go if he does end up winning Formula 2. You look at Oscar Piastri having a very strong season. So they've got a lot of strong drivers. Christian Lundgaard, who just had a very, very strong IndyCar debut. They've got a lot of strong drivers in the system, but nowhere to put them yet. And so Alonso getting that 1 year extension or just kind of going into that second year of the contract makes sense. But past that, need to start looking at whether they're going to actually be an academy program and use those academy drivers, or if they're going to continue trying to poach drivers from other teams like they did with Ocon, and like maybe some people thought that they might this year with Pierre Gasly.
Yeah, Oscar Piastri is one that's really sticking out to me after Alonso's contract is done. If he takes that next step again next year in F2, that's a very likely landing spot for him. He's leading the championship
right now. He might just go and win the dang thing.
Yeah, definitely. He could. It's going to be really close between himself and Guan Yu Zhou for that F2 title.
Oh, yeah, F2 is far from done with the amount of chaos that happens in that series and the amount of contenders at the top of the grid. Anybody from like Piastri all the way down to like Lawson can realistically win the championship still.
Yeah, lots of different moving parts for F1. Silly season for not really necessarily this season, except when we know that Mercedes seat will start to finalize some more things. That's the biggest thing that's kind of left unanswered. But for the season after that, we got some really good youth movement potentially there, and specifically Oscar Piastri. Who knows what's going to happen
as well? Yeah,
there's a lot of really good. The Red Bull prospects. Liam Lawson's going to be really, really good as well. So there's a lot of different things that I think this. Like I said, I think I predicted at the beginning of the season. I don't know how much youth movement we're going to see going into in 2022. It seemed like we've had an influx of of young talent from F2 the past couple of seasons. This may be more of a dry year. And then the season after that, we maybe start going back and looking into that talent pool again, when some of these guys are a little bit more mature and a little bit more ready to go to that next step in Formula One. But we'll see what happens. Could definitely be wrong on that, but it's seeming like it's going in that direction, where there's going to be less likely that an F2 guy maybe makes that step up into a midfield battle team or mid-pack team next season. But happy to have Fernando Alonso and, of course, Sergio Perez staying back in their respective rides for next season. The final little bit here for news and notes is an interesting one, an interesting prospect here down the line. Michael Andretti is actively pursuing to acquire an F1 team. Who would have thought the Andretti family trying to get back into Formula One? Of course, the top three choices that are being rumored out there that are feasible for this kind of a purchase would be Haas, potentially Alfa Romeo, and maybe even Williams. So I don't know. There's not really more details in terms of what they're looking at, but the prospect of Michael Andretti trying to get back, or the Andretti family trying to get back into Formula One, is definitely an interesting one.
For starters, I disagree with Williams because they were just purchased. So
I know. I just, from the article, that's the only thing that they
can't see that.
I don't see it either.
Given everything that's been said so far, for starters, the initial article from Marshall Pruitt and some of the follow-up comments he made on his podcast are basically what you would expect, that Michael Andretti has been looking to do something along these lines, has kind of picked up talks, and that after the initial report, trying to downplay it. And that's kind of the classic Andretti move of not trying to put too much fuel to the fire. But I really, really trust Marshall Pruitt as a source and what he has to say. And so I do think that there's something going on here. And obviously with them having somebody like Colton Herta in their IndyCar team, and the potential Formula One prospects of bringing him over, and the advertising and everything like that goes on being an American team and having Drive to Survive, all this kind of stuff, it would be a good time for a team like them to get involved. Of course, we would prefer to have them just join the grid and have 11 teams, but given the massive costs to enter the entry fee for Formula One as it currently stands, it makes much more economic sense to try and buy into a team. And so everything that we've heard as well doesn't seem like Haas is potentially the team. Alfa Romeo, I could possibly see them maybe buying into or buying Sauber and maybe doing some relationship there. I could see that. I could also see Red Bull looking to move AlphaTauri. There's been rumors for many, many years over them potentially being interested in moving that team away. They're the only Formula One team that basically owns two teams. With Max Verstappen there, how much do they need that second team, stuff like that. So there's a lot of different scenarios that could happen. When you look higher up the grid, I think there's less options. Aston Martin just rebranded with Lawrence Stroll. They're not going to go anywhere. Alpine is a works team unless they get out of Formula One. That's not going to happen. McLaren, that's not going to happen. So you would be looking to kind of that 7th through 10th place teams if something were to happen here. But I really do hope this happens. Having the Andretti name back in Formula One would be awesome. It would open up much more possibilities between IndyCar and Formula One. When you look at Colton Herta there, when you look at some of the other names coming up in IndyCar. So it would be really cool to see this come to fruition. The timeline of it, I'm not too sure about, but I really, really hope this does end up happening, because this would be really, really cool.
Yeah, this would be historic if they could make this happen, where they come back. And I mean, F1 would have to be all over it. Drive to Survive would have a whole episode, maybe even a whole season, basically on a move like this. The drama that would come with having the Andretti name back in Formula One would be absolutely spectacular, and would be must-watch TV to see them back in some respect. I wonder, like you said, it's an interesting kind of discussion where IndyCar could kind of almost be now the feeder system to now F1.
I wouldn't go that far,
but I'm just spitballing here, where like instead of F1 drivers that can't quite make it to the grid right now, maybe they look at IndyCar as an option. But now if you know, there's a bit more of a cross or a parallel between the two sports, that we could see some more guys in IndyCar that get off to a flying start. Colton Herta is obviously the main one there with that name, that potentially could look at a Formula One drive down the line. Pato O'Ward, like that, just trying to give him some seat time with the McLaren in Abu Dhabi later this season because he won the race at Texas earlier this year. There's just like those little discussions like that where there's more opportunity for these guys in North America to try and make that next step over to Europe and into the Formula One circuit, which is difficult to do for a lot of these guys that grew up in the States or grew up in North America. It's much more difficult to make your mark on the international stage of Formula One than rather than just living in England or something like that. So lots of different possibilities with this, but Michael Andretti is definitely one of the household names, the Andretti name specifically in motorsports. And it would be welcome to have them back in Formula One.
Yeah, and it is a little bit surprising just given it is Michael Andretti and how his Formula One stint went that he is interested in looking into this. But the Andretti name and Michael Andretti have looked at things in the past. They've looked at getting into NASCAR back in the day. So it's not like this is necessarily somebody that has only done IndyCar and is looking to stay in IndyCar. And this is kind of a wild rumor. This is somebody that has been proactive and looking to kind of look elsewhere. The Andretti name is associated in a couple of different things. They're involved in Walkinshaw Andretti and stuff like that. When you look down in supercars and Australian stuff. So they do have a footprint in multiple different areas of motorsport. But looking to the potential of a Formula One team would be absolutely huge and would be really, really cool to see just from the name value of having Andretti associated back with Formula One, of having another bridge, as you mentioned, to IndyCar and already having McLaren as a bit of a bridge over the last couple of years, but potentially another one in Andretti. So a lot of really, really cool stuff that could potentially happen with this. Really hope it happens, but I'm optimistic with it. I do think that something will happen at some point down the road. I just don't really know what the timeline will be for it.
No, I think probably next season is a little bit ambitious.
No, definitely not by that. It would be 2023 at earliest.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Like it's just going to be a process here, but at least in the initial talking stages here, it's being discussed whether this is a possibility down the line. And as long as there's a possibility, there's a chance, obviously, that comes along with that. So I'll take any chance that we can get to have Andretti back in Formula One. But unless you have anything else to add on that, Kyle, that'll do it for the news and notes for today's episode. Let's take a look at this upcoming weekend for the Belgian Grand Prix. And while there's a bit of an up in the air, it's a talking point right now. It's been kind of damp. It's been kind of dry. It's been all over the place. It's been really spotty weather so far in the opening 2 practice sessions earlier today. But hopefully we'll see some sort of action with the weather, maybe for this race. But honestly, Spa under the sun in all its glory is pretty beautiful in itself. So I don't know if I really want any weather to really deter that. But
well, I hate to break it to you because there's a 90% chance of rain on Sunday. So
well, okay, there goes that. But with F1's luck, it'll probably happen right after the checkered flag when the rain usually falls. But looking forward to seeing what can happen this weekend. Verstappen was quickest in the second practice session. Valtteri Bottas was quickest in the first. Verstappen ended up in the barriers in at the very end of FP2, had a little bit of damage, but shouldn't be an overall issue for them. Going into tomorrow, should have the car fixed nice and tidy for them, so it shouldn't affect their performance. One quick note from the Hungarian Grand Prix, both Perez and Verstappen's power units from that race are no longer usable. So they are going to eventually have to take a grid penalty for changing engines and going over the specified amount, I believe is 3 for the season. So I think they're going to have to take a 4th kind of power unit for at some point this season. So interesting to see when they kind of time that. Obviously they want to present themselves with the best opportunity to pass and whatnot, but just an interesting note on that. But let's get into our fantasy picks here, Kyle. We can take a look at our lineups overall this time around and give us our overall strategy going into this weekend for the Belgian Grand Prix. But your initial thoughts on what we've seen maybe so far, and then we can take a look at our picks.
Yeah, nothing too much so far. It's basically what you would anticipate. There's a lot of questions as to what kind of weather is going to play in this weekend. There's a high percentage chance of rain that is kind of picked up a little bit. Earlier in the week, it looked like it was going to be more 50-50. As of right now, the forecast is looking a lot more likely that there's going to be rain all weekend. And so with that, you kind of take the results so far with a grain of salt, and then you look at who's performed in the rain over their careers and stuff like that. So excited to see how things play out. Of course, there was the very, very memorable Spa-Francorchamps qualifying session where the Racing Points tried to get out there on the slicks. Sergio Perez almost binned it up Eau Rouge and into Radillon, and Esteban Ocon had a great run trying to time it perfectly, stuff like that. So we'll see if we get anything like that again this weekend. But there are quite a few drivers in the field that have had some very strong results at this circuit before, namely Esteban Ocon is somebody that I look at as having some really, really strong runs in the past. Alpine look to be building off of course, their win last time out with Ocon. So a lot of positive momentum going on there. Interested to see how things play out as well, coming off of Hungary, coming off of the break. There's a lot of drivers that have a bit of a bitter taste in their mouth coming from the last Grand Prix and have had to kind of simmer on that for a while. So fascinated to see what we get this weekend.
Definitely. Lots of intrigue coming into this Grand Prix this weekend. It really feels like it's the big stage now. This is crunch time here. We're getting into that. No mistakes. You got to minimize mistakes at least from here on out if you want to have a shot at improving your position in the championship standings, or actually go for the title if you're Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton. But let's start off with what our fantasy lineups are looking like this weekend. And we didn't do a Hungarian preview show for the Hungarian Grand Prix, just with scheduling, and just we wanted to take that little bit of a break when the NASCAR summer break was on and we had the Olympic coverage and everything like that we were both personally doing. So we haven't really done a fantasy preview in a couple of weeks or even over a month now. But let's take a look at what our lineups are going to be looking like this weekend. And they're very similar, if you saw it on our Instagram page, what they were for the Hungarian Grand Prix for both of us. So overall strategy coming into this weekend for myself, I'm going with guys that can perform in both the wet and look good in the opening practice sessions so far, and obviously fit underneath the budget. I am at 104.9. It sounds like a radio station, but that's my my number in terms of my budget right now. So I'm almost 5 million over what the initial starting point was. Really feel good about the progress that I've made with that. So it allows me to have more options coming into this weekend in terms of the availability of some teams and some drivers. But the trio that have always been there, Max Verstappen, Pierre Gasly, and Lando Norris, those are not changing. Lando Norris is going to be my turbo driver as well this weekend, just based off of how consistent he's been. P3 in the Drivers' Championship. I'm not crazy about him in the wet necessarily, but I do like him more than Daniel Ricciardo, obviously, this weekend, given the practice time so far. And it seems like Ricciardo maybe is just not quite there with Lando, despite Ricciardo's P4 finish here last season in this Grand Prix. So I like Lando Norris a little bit this weekend. I'm just going to stick with him for the turbo. It's worked so far. Gasly, really good so far in the pace in both the dry, and he's a pretty good wet weather racer as well. So I like the combination of that. And Max Verstappen is self-explanatory, but I'll take a look at the rest of my lineup in a little bit. But your overall strategy coming into this weekend for the Belgian Grand Prix?
Yeah, so I'm going for the high end. And it's something that I tried to do at Hungary and didn't really work out. So I've got Red Bull as my constructor, I believe, in both Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. I know if it is the wet weather race, Lewis Hamilton has the edge there. But we've seen Perez have some good results in the past. And I like Max Verstappen as well. So I'll stick with Red Bull as the constructor with Max Verstappen in the lineup as well. In terms of the high end, other guys that I have, Charles Leclerc is in my lineup. He's won at Spa in the past. This is a circuit that he's performed very well at. The Ferraris look like they have some good pace, and I believe in him if it does get to the wet weather. And so because of that, I've actually got him as my turbo driver, going a bit risky on that one. I know Norris is more of the safe bet, but I do believe that we will get a wet weather race. And because of that, I like the high end of Charles Leclerc. Because of that, think that he can maybe get up there and contend for a podium potentially if things break a certain way. So Charles Leclerc is my turbo driver this weekend. Mentioned it, Lando Norris also in the lineup there. Again, just kind of a mainstay given the price, given how well he's been this season. Just no reason to take him out. And then the lower two options, Pierre Gasly's there. Was thinking about switching it up to Ocon. I really, really like him at the circuit, but couldn't really make that change and then afford something bigger for my last pick there. So I am going to stick with Pierre Gasly there. Again, maybe not the best results at Spa in the past, but I think he's consistent enough. And I think that he's a solid bet for that price point. For the last entry, though, I did make one last change. So I am making a change for this one, going with 506.
Sneaky guy.
I know. I said that I was sticking with it. I am going to make a change, and it's a risky one because it's one that can maybe blow up in my face a little bit. Swinging on the high-end potential of a wet weather race and a good result from George Russell as my final entry here. If he qualifies well, and then the race is maybe a bit more dry, that can easily end up as a negative point stay for me for George Russell. But wet weather, we saw what he's been able to do in the past in the wet. Very, very talented driver, and the Williams has shown potential at certain circuits. So looking at all of that combined, I feel like if we get a bit of a wet, crazy weekend, I feel like we could see George Russell contending for a point or two come the end of the race. So George Russell is going to be the last entry for myself, swinging a bit on there, but overall the theme is swinging on that higher potential, going with Red Bull as the constructor, going with Max Verstappen, of course, but then turboing Leclerc, looking at his past win at Spa, going with Norris, which you always do, going with Gasly, which normally you always do, and then swinging on Russell with the high end potential. So that's kind of the overall theme for this one. I really like Esteban Ocon, thought about him, didn't really end up fitting with it. He was a bit of a toss up between him and Gasly for myself. But I think overall, this is what I'm going to go with here.
Who did you switch out George Russell with?
Schumacher.
Okay, you had the budget to do that. All right. I like the little switch there at the end. If it does go to a wet weather race, I definitely give the advantage to George Russell in terms of making up positions rather than the Haas, which is probably just going to be terrible no matter what.
That's the point. That the Schumacher is a good fantasy option because they qualify back row. And so if there's any carnage or anything like that, they gain those positions. So he's a very safe bet. He's a very cheap option as well. So you're able to afford other things. And so because of that, he's been a much better fantasy play this year than Russell, who qualifies well and then drops back on race day because of the Williams pace. So it's not just about the finishing position in fantasy. Of course, there's a lot of other factors that go into it, which is what makes George Russell a risky play. Even at being a $6.2 million entry, he very easily could be a negative entry, which he's been multiple times this year. But with the wet weather potential, I think we could get another chaotic race this weekend. And so for that, going to go a bit riskier with Russell at the end of my lineup here.
For myself to round up my lineup, I'm sticking the same. I'm not pulling a Kyle and switching, even though they said that you wouldn't. No, just kidding.
Never said that I wouldn't.
No, fair enough. But I got Mick Schumacher in there this weekend. I didn't really get a good sense of what this lineup is capable of at the Hungarian Grand Prix after the first lap shenanigans, where almost half of it was wiped out and out of contention. So I'm going to stick with Mick. And I think this has just been a good track for him. He had good results last season in F2, finishing on the podium in both races. So I like that a lot for him, his confidence. And this is obviously a big weekend for him, coming back to the site of where his dad made his F1 debut. So really looking forward to seeing what he can do. The tribute helmet is really, really special as well. And that Schumacher documentary is coming out September 15th as well on Netflix, right around the corner. So going to be watching that probably on the day it's released. Going to be an emotional watch for sure.
Interested to see, just quickly on it, interested to see the direction that they do end up taking with it. There's a lot of different ways that you can take a Michael Schumacher documentary, just given the family involvement and stuff. I assume it'll be much more positive than negative or anything like that, but I am interested to see what maybe they focus on, whether it's earlier career with Benetton and stuff like that, whether it's more the prime with Ferrari or maybe some of the later stuff with Mercedes. I'm interested to see what direction they go down for this documentary.
Yeah, it's the only family-approved film. So this is obviously a big deal since we haven't seen Michael Schumacher in public since his skiing accident back in 2013. So we're wishing him all the best, obviously. But hopefully Mick puts a good performance out there in the special helmet for Haas this weekend. And I'm hopeful that I can do that with the nice budget that he has, $5.8 million on the cap. And that's pretty manageable for me, considering what I have in other places, namely the constructor. But Esteban Ocon stays in my lineup once again here. The swing worked at the Hungarian Grand Prix, clearly, putting him in there as the race victor. Huge points day for him there. Only bumped him up 0.1 with the budget, but that still increases my overall value of the team. So I'll take that any day of the week. And he's had really, really consistent results here. And every single time he's been here, at Spa-Francorchamps. So I've got no reason to go against that. Alpine looked very, very good so far through the opening 2 practice sessions. Renault was also 4th and 5th here last season as well. So this is clearly a good track that suits their car. And I like Esteban Ocon here as the secondary option. Could be even faster than Fernando Alonso if all things come together for him this weekend over qualifying and the race pace. And then finally, the big one, I am sticking with Mercedes as my constructor here for this weekend. I've got $0.1 million left in my budget overall to make this work, but it does work, and I'm going to stick with it just to see what I can do. I think if it does end up being a wet weather race, Verstappen is no slouch by any means, but the advantage does switch to Hamilton slightly. We'll see who comes out on top on the qualifying session. That could be very much the dictator in terms of who wins this race. But I do like the Mercedes duo overall better than the Red Bull duo this weekend. They're very, very close, it seems, on race pace and qualifying pace. It's just going to come down to who can ever put the lap together, and that's going to be the deciding factor going into the Sunday and also on the long run pace for the Grand Prix. So I'm looking forward to seeing what can happen here. I think Bottas is going to be pretty solid here this weekend. He needs to have a bounce back weekend after the disaster that was the first corner in Hungary. And I think Hamilton just has a slight edge. Verstappen could definitely be spurred on by the home crowd, but that's why I have him in the lineup, and the Mercedes is kind of my buffer. I think Perez is going to be good. I just don't know if he'll quite be there in that top 3 mixture like the Mercedes will. And I'd just give them the edge based off of them getting most likely 2 cars on the podium here this weekend.
I don't know about the likely part, but
I think it's up for debate, but I do think, at least from my perspective, I just think Mercedes has a little bit more momentum right now. Sure, the summer break can kind of make it more of an even playing field, but they seem to be firing pretty good so far this weekend. Haven't really heard any complaints from Hamilton or Bottas on the handling of the car, which we've heard at times this season, and then Red Bull has actually capitalized on that. Verstappen's been very happy with his car as well. But I just give the edge to Mercedes in terms of that, and just want to see what happens. If I have to switch down to Red Bull next weekend for the Italian Grand Prix, then I will. Who knows? It's just an experimental weekend for me here. But I do like the value picks here in Schumacher and Ocon. If it wasn't such a good track for them, I definitely would look at switching it. But I like the circuit for both of those two, so it makes this worthwhile for me.
Yeah, and just to the point of some of the younger guys, interested to see what we get from a Yuki Tsunoda this weekend. Of course, won one of the sprint races last year in Formula 2 here with the chaos that was the Nikita Mazepin stuff after the race, but had a very, very strong race. Or sorry, it was the feature race that he won at Spa. So excited to see what he can do this weekend, if he can kind of take that momentum from that result last year and convert that into another very strong performance this time around. Interested to see maybe the battle between Mazepin and Schumacher as well, because those two were both on the podium of that feature race as well. So it was a good track for all 3 of the rookie drivers on the field in last year's Formula 2. And so should be a nice battle between the 2 Haas's there to see who comes on top. And then maybe where Tsunoda comes out on the field, given some of the pace that AlphaTauri has.
Definitely. Lots of different things. There should be a lot of different storylines to keep your eye on throughout the Grand Prix. And maybe the TV broadcast won't show it, but there's going to be some interesting battles to keep your eye on in terms of just pride and head-to-head stuff like that this weekend. But the midfield battle looks extremely close. I don't know who's going to come out on top. It seems like there's at least 4 constructors there that could end up getting that maybe 5th position in qualifying or 6th position, whoever ends up getting up there. Most likely a Lando Norris, but then Alpine, Aston Martin looks very solid as well. They're just a little bit too pricey in terms of their drivers to make our lineups probably fit. Or Lance Stroll may not be quite worth it. Sebastian Vettel is somebody I was looking at maybe this weekend. That.
If it rains, he's very good in the wet.
No, that's true. That's very true. No, that's probably a mistake on my end. But and then AlphaTauri looks good with Pierre Gasly so far with their race pace and qualifying pace as well. Ferrari is a bit of a question mark, it seems, so far this weekend. They haven't maybe showed their cards all the way yet, but Leclerc had an issue in FP2 that kind of prevented maybe them getting all the running that they would have liked to as well. But let's get to the predictions here, Kyle, for the Grand Prix and for qualifying as well on the Saturday. Who do you have coming out on top for the pole and starting on the front row for the Belgian Grand Prix?
For pole, this is a difficult one. Originally, I would have said Verstappen, but with stuff that happened in FP2 and everything like that, I think I will go with Lewis Hamilton, assuming that it does end up raining, stuff like that. Hamilton has shown to be more consistent and be better, quite frankly, in wet weather conditions. Mercedes seems to have a bit of their mojo back this weekend. We'll see how it actually breaks out for the race itself. But I'll take Lewis Hamilton to win the pole this weekend.
I am as well. I just like the role he's been on lately, and it just seems like he's got a good mindset, a good bit of swagger to him coming into this weekend, and he's been very consistent so far throughout the practice runnings at Spa. So I'm going to lean him for the pole, and if it goes wet, the immediate advantage goes to Lewis Hamilton for his ability in wet weather conditions, like we've said. Podium, let's go from third to first here. Who do you...
best of the rest?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Excuse me. Best of the rest. Do you want to go first for this one, or should I?
Well, I just went first, so you go first for this one.
Okay, for me this weekend, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here. Going to go for a little bit of a spicy midfield. Pierre Gasly, best of the rest this weekend.
Really? Okay. I like it. Hey, I mean, go for it.
This is an important track to him, obviously, after the loss of his best friend, Antoine Hubert. I think there's a lot of emotions that come along with that. I think he wants to really try and prove something again this weekend, and he's just got a little bit of fire underneath him, a little bit extra oomph with Pierre Gasly here this weekend. AlphaTauri looks good. I like him as the best of the rest.
I like it. Again,
I went cut and dry for the NASCAR winner pick. I didn't go that for this.
Well, this doesn't matter. Anyways.
Fair enough.
I'm betting on the wet weather, and even though the practice results haven't really been there, I don't particularly care about practice that much. And so I am taking the Ferrari with Charles Leclerc to be best of the rest. I think we're going to get a bit of a chaotic Sunday. I think we're going to get rain. And because of that combination, I think it's going to really go down to driver talent. And Leclerc, having won here in the past, he knows how to get around the circuit. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to have him as my best of the rest, maybe as a bit of a come up the field kind of result for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc this weekend.
I think that makes sense. You turboed him, might as well go all the way and put him as your best of the rest. Third place. Who ends up as the third guy on the podium here this weekend? Does Charles Leclerc end up getting on your podium?
And with that, he does end up on my podium. Charles Leclerc with the podium finish for Ferrari. Again, I'm huge on his talents, and I think in the wet weather conditions that can really come through. I'm not really buying into the Ferrari being down in practice or anything like that. We'll see how things end up going. I know that they were saying that they were having some troubles in the cool conditions and stuff. But I think once the rain comes into play, which it almost certainly will at some point during the weekend, whether that's just qualifying, just the race, or both, I think that they'll come through with that. And so I think that we'll see maybe some issues for multiple different people in the race. And so for that, I'll have Charles Leclerc coming through with a bit of a surprise podium in third.
Wow. I like the full swing here. You're going all in on Mr. Leclerc, but looking forward to seeing what he can do this weekend. But for myself, I'm going boring. Valtteri Bottas ends up third for the Belgian Grand Prix. I just think the Mercedes pace is just going to be a little bit too much to handle for Perez to be up there. Bottas is no slouch in his own right here at Spa. It seems like he's pretty consistent here. Was close to Hamilton last year within that 10-second range. That's not too bad. So I'd say that, Hamilton's obviously the favorite to lead that, and he should lead that Mercedes duo this weekend, but Bottas may have something to say about it in terms of getting a podium spot.
I will say, given how poor Bottas has been over the last couple of years in wet weather conditions and the likelihood of it being wet weather, I'm a little surprised how high you are on him this weekend.
Why not? You surprised I'm high on Bottas. I don't know if you've ever.
No, I'm surprised given the circumstances.
Okay. Well, I don't think I ever would have thought you would have said those words that I'm high on Bottas, but nonetheless,
you're the one who's got him on the podium.
Yeah, I know, but I'm going to go with the most popular podium in F1 history this weekend. That's just basically what I've got. Second, who do we have winning the Grand Prix? We have Hamilton on pole. Do we say it switches for the Grand Prix on Sunday? What do you got?
I don't. I'm going to have Lewis Hamilton winning the Belgian Grand Prix. Just too much likelihood for wet weather, and Hamilton is just otherworldly when the track is wet. So until I see that kind of otherworldly performance from Max Verstappen being able to beat Hamilton head to head in wet weather, I just can't bet on it happening. So for myself, Lewis Hamilton wins the Belgian Grand Prix. And that being said, I know the chaos and everything that happened at Imola and all that stuff. Still going to go with it. With Lewis Hamilton having a relatively clean weekend.
Okay. I'm going to switch it up then. I'm going to go with Max Verstappen to win the Belgian Grand Prix this weekend. It's got a lot of the orange faithful, the Dutchies out there.
Well, that's him. Next weekend.
Well, yes, but if also for this one as well.
No. I know. I'm saying next weekend is going to be insane when we go to Zandvoort, but.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot wait to see what that track brings. I don't know how necessarily it's going to be in terms of the racing product, but the atmosphere should be electric there. I'm going to say, though, Max Verstappen gets another victory on the season, gets his championship battle and his championship path back in the right direction here. Hamilton will come just short. I think it's going to be a really late race-long battle between the two of them. We'll see what happens with the weather. It's all up in the air right now, but if it does eventually get dry, and Verstappen is within striking distance, within like a 2 or 3 second margin, potentially, I could see them going head to head in the closing stages of this race, because I think the Red Bull may just have the race pace, but I give the advantage to the Mercedes maybe in the wet, just specifically Lewis Hamilton's talent in the wet over Verstappen, which is crazy to think because Verstappen is probably one of the best on the grid in terms of the wet weather conditions as well. But that's what I'm going with. We're going with a very different podium between the two of us. We don't have the same race winner, and we don't have the third place guy. It's a little bit different. At least we usually have pretty similar.
Yeah, that's fair.
All righty. Any final thoughts before we round out the Belgian Grand Prix episode?
Just before we round it out, I do think that there's a discussion to be had, just given some of the recent stuff that's happened. Of course, earlier today, the W Series crash at Radillon. Looking back a few weeks, Jack Aitken's crash in World Endurance Championship at Radillon. Looking back a couple of years, of course, not necessarily Radillon because it was off to the right rather than the barriers on the left. But of course, Antoine Hubert's crash and everything like that. There's been a lot of conversation today on Twitter and social media about the state of Eau Rouge and Radillon and whether changes need to be made. So I'll start things off and then I'll get some comments from you as well on it. I think the track itself shouldn't be changed. I don't think there's any problem having that kind of corner or turn or anything like that. I think the issue is how close the barriers are on the left-hand side when you get through Radillon. It's just too close to the circuit to where if you do go offline and you do have a bit of a big shunt there, the circuit is sending you back onto the racing surface. So you look at Jack Aitken's crash a few weeks ago in the World Endurance Championship, crash to the left, hit, comes back across, gets hit again. When you look at the W Series crash this time earlier today, as we're recording this, a lot of people crashing into the left. And of course, with how the circuit was, a lot of people going off into that area as well. But again, being sent back into that racing line, being sent into that racing surface. I know the Hubert and Correa crash was very different because it was off to the right and being sent back across the track. And that was a bit of a fluke circumstance in that regard. But I think if there's any changes to be made, and I do think that there should be some, because the way that the barriers are on the left-hand side of that turn are too close. And so if you have a big crash, which is always going to be a big crash, if you are crashing at that part of the circuit, is sending you into an even more dangerous position back onto the track. So something needs to be done in that regard because we're having too many big accidents like that. Don't need to change the racing at all. And the racing surface at all, or the track layout or anything like that. But I think moving the barriers back and creating either a gravel trap there or something like that, something that's safer for the drivers, because it's too high speed of an area, too blind of a corner as well, going uphill like that. The cars, after going uphill like that, get very light and it's easy to lose them there, especially with how it's flat out essentially with the cars nowadays. So I do think something needs to be done there, but nothing too drastic to change the layout or anything like that. I think moving the barriers and creating something there that's safer would be the best way to handle it.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I don't know how tall of a task it is to move it. I don't know.
I don't think it really matters how much of it, like you were talking about driver safety.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just like how much of like, is it in the hill? I'm not quite sure. I just have to try.
It's a forest around it. So like you cut a few trees down, you move it back and job's done.
Yeah, I know. I if they can, then yes, I would absolutely be for that, because driver safety is the utmost importance. I mean, these guys put their lives on the line for our entertainment and to put to give them the thrill and everything that they want behind the wheel of a race car. That's why they do it. They want to win, and they can't do that when the track isn't safe. So it's obviously very scary. Just seeing all of motorsports is just incredibly dangerous, and it just goes overlooked. And we've praised driver safety and track safety countless times on this show, and rightly so. And we give them their credit when it's where credit is due. And in times like this, it's good to take a pause and to reassess and what can we do to make things better and change things so that it is better for the future generations and the current generation, so that the next time something bad doesn't happen. Not to say that anything bad happened today, thankfully, with the W Series at the time of recording this, all drivers appear to be okay after that wreck, but it's one of the most dangerous corners basically in all of motorsports. It's a blind corner, fast speeds, and it's uphill. It's an incredibly dangerous area. But they've been able to make it through a large number of times, but in the rare cases that they don't, we've had some very tragic incidents, and we want to make sure that we minimize that and eliminate them as best as we can. And I agree with you that it's a good discussion to have. They probably will take the proper precautions to assess it and see if it's feasible, and it should be feasible to prevent drivers from having to worry about something like that. And that's the last thing we want, is anybody to get hurt or even pass away from something like that. So it's an important discussion to have, but I'm hopeful that after this race weekend, we can talk about it more openly or hear more thoughts from the track itself and see what they want to do, if it's possible. And if it is, then I'm sure that we'll take the right the measures and put it in place.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Overall, the importance is the driver safety of it. And it's not trying to, everyone recognizes the inherent risk in motorsports, and it's not trying to take anything like that away, but it's up to the tracks and the FIA and everybody involved to make it as safe as possible. And currently the state of that corner, I don't think, is as safe as it should be. And we've seen that especially over the last couple of months, earlier today, and then with Jack Aitken's crash in the World Endurance Championship a few weeks ago. So we're lucky that everyone seems to be okay from today's crash, Visser, and I think there's another driver as well that were sent to hospital, appearing that there is no serious injuries or anything like that. We're awaiting word on the drivers that were sent to hospital, but overall, positive signs that nobody was seriously injured in this crash, nor in Jack Aitken's crash in the World Endurance Championship a few weeks ago. But you can only play that game a few times until somebody does get hurt. And so you need to be proactive rather than reactive. And even though it is a bit reactive in this circumstance, given the crashes that we've seen, I think it's best that they make a change to the circuit before anything bad happens again.
Yeah. 100% agreement there. And hopefully we get some word about the driver's condition here fairly shortly at the time of recording this. Probably will have heard something maybe when you're watching or listening to this. So yeah, an important discussion to have. Glad you brought that up, Kyle, because it's such an historic venue. It's an historic track. And the last thing we would want is to have something like this overshadow what it is, a spectacular weekend of racing at a track like this for F1 and for the W Series and any other competition or any other motorsport that take part at Spa-Francorchamps. But I think that'll do it for the F1 preview show for the Belgian Grand Prix. Make sure to go follow us on Instagram at The Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at The Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. We'd really, really appreciate it. All the links to our social channels will be in the description of the video. And it feels good to be back. It's nice to be back in Toronto here, 2 blocks away from Mr. Cushman over there, but still going to be an interesting way to end the regular season here for Formula One. We'll see how it all pans out with the championship battle with Verstappen and Hamilton this weekend. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. We'll talk to you next week to get you set up for the Dutch Grand Prix.